Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 1st, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about President Trump and the 2022 midterm elections. Now, before I get into this video, I do want to say that I am currently away at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, so I'm going to be recording in a different area than I normally am, but I do want to say that should just be making up for the voice differences. Other than that, everything else will be the same. The upload schedule might be a little bit wonky, but I will be back to normal probably around August 10th, 11th, because I do get my wisdom teeth taken out on August 6th, and I can't imagine I'd be making videos immediately after, but we'll see. So, you might be noticing today, if you're watching the New York Times, CNN, Politico, or really any other political news source, that President Trump seems to be the main focus of today's points of interest. And the reason for that is because of the Save America Political Action Committee, in which President Trump has raised over $100 million. Now, this is a lot of money. $100 million puts him in a very powerful position ahead of the midterm elections. And generally speaking, this puts Republicans at an even more powerful position, considering that they have raised money on their own. President Trump individually has raised $100 million on top of already a lot of money that he has stored in the bank. So this really should worry Democrats. You see, President Trump is a name that the Democratic Party has been using for fundraising and political power across the nation. They have been using his name in political ads, in rallies, and pretty much every point in order to damage the GOP. But he also has that recognition amongst voters that has not left away, even though he's no longer in office, that he can use to build up momentum and to get support, money, etc. for the 2022 midterm elections. Now, Politico was the first news source to report this, and they went through the first 6 months of President Trump's Save America Political Action Committee, where he raised $82 million in that alone. In addition, if you're looking at other political action committees, such as the Make America Great Again Political Action Committee, President Trump has raised millions there as well, amongst other political action committees in which President Trump just seems to be able to get a lot of money funneled towards potential campaigns or just candidates that he personally wants to support. And if you look on his website, the language that he uses, the rhetoric that he has done is pretty much the same as it was back in January of 2021, as it was immediately following the election. Save America, confirm election security, ensure that President Trump is elected again, rebuild our nation. Despite Joe Biden only being in office for around 6 months, he's doing everything he can to really attack the president of the United States and use that for energy in the future. This man is not leaving. You know, when Donald Trump said during the election season that if he loses to Joe Biden, that America would never hear from him again, we now know that is completely false. He made that promise sort of, I think, to scare many of these voters to get their other family members, their friends, to vote for President Trump. But obviously now President Trump has a clear and concerted interest in the future of this nation and is doing everything he can to point it in his direction, essentially do what he can in order to make the primaries in his favor, have candidates in Congress that are supporters of President Trump and that will listen to him in the future, essentially just trying to create the government in an image of his own, despite not actually being in that government. And raising this amount of money is monumentous. I mean, the Democratic Party hasn't even raised $100 million over the past 6 months. The Democratic Party does seem to be lagging behind the Republican Party in certain portions. You know, while the Democrats might be outpacing in Senate races, they seem to be under fundraising in House races, which is never a good sign considering in both chambers, typically speaking, the Democrats do pull ahead in fundraising. And the fact that Republicans, not Donald Trump, are out fundraising Republicans in addition to Donald Trump, building this war chest of over $100 million also tells us that the GOP will not only tap into their resources, but his. You see, Joe Biden doesn't have his own political action committee that is raising money separately than the Democratic Party. You have the Democratic Congressional Committee that is raising money. You have the Democratic Senatorial Committee that is raising money. You have the JoeBiden.com website that is raising money through Act Blue, but it all is going towards one general fund by and for the Democratic Party, in which Donald Trump is doing this by and for himself. He's not doing this for the GOP. His money is not being directly funneled in. So for him to raise so much money as a single person puts him in an extremely powerful position. Because what do we know? So far in the Senate elections that President Trump has endorsed all of these Republicans that are running, but in these 5 races, he has yet to make announcements in some of them. He endorsed Representative Ted Budd in the state of North Carolina, but has not yet made an endorsement in Pennsylvania, Ohio, but seems to be focusing on those two states in particular, just because of their competitive nature. He might focus on Alabama and Missouri just as an afterthought in the future, but generally speaking, those states won't be competitive. But with 5 open Senate seats, all held by Republicans, he has a lot of power. You see, what happened in North Carolina was the first display of true support and true amount of power that President Trump has over these races. If you actually want to see the state of North Carolina, one thing you might know is that Pat McCrory, the former governor of the state, was the frontrunner. Ted Budd was actually a candidate here who was just a U.S. representative, and he actually was running against Mark Walker, another U.S. representative from the state of North Carolina, Mark Walker being a long-standing supporter of President Trump. Now, when President Trump endorsed Ted Budd, that seemed to have changed the way that the voters looked at Ted Budd. Immediately following the endorsement, while he did lose to Pat McCrory in the first poll, they went on to inform this polling sample that Donald Trump had endorsed Ted Budd. And you can imagine who took the lead. While it doesn't exactly reflect here, that's because the first round only showed Ted Budd at 19%. That's certainly an increase from 5% or even 9% when the rest of the candidates seem to be doing better than Ted Budd. After Donald Trump's endorsement, it put him in a very powerful position. And this was before we knew how much money that Donald Trump had for the 2022 midterm elections. You see, the thing is here, now that he has all of this money, he can allocate it towards ads in certain areas. He just spent an ad buy in Texas's 6th district through the Save America Pact in order to ensure that we saw Susan Wright, potentially the next representative from the state of Texas. But now she's not. She lost that race despite Donald Trump spending money on the race, which raised questions about the amount of support and the amount of influence he had over certain regions. But the money doesn't lie. Typically speaking, 90% of congressional candidates win their elections if they out-fundraise their opponents. And now these Trump-backed Republicans will have that money to out-fundraise their opponents. They will have that money to outspend their opponents. And considering that Democrats are in a pretty vulnerable position right now in the generic ballot, I can't imagine that finding out that Donald Trump has raised so much more money will put them in a more happier position. This is not good. You can't tell the Democratic Party that they are lagging behind general Republicans in terms of overall fundraising, in addition to Donald Trump's $100 million in the first 6 months, that they will be in a good position for 2022. I think they will be in the United States Senate, but I wouldn't be so sure about the House or about individual governor elections or potentially some Senate elections. You see, the thing is here, the GOP ultimately has the advantage in almost every regard when it comes down to individual races, when it comes down to redistricting, and that's just because it's a midterm election year. It is unheard of for an incumbent party in the White House to gain seats in midterm elections. It happened in 2002. It happened, I believe, in 1998 or 94. One of those elections, I think it was 98. But besides that, you typically don't see it happening, and that's not what we expect for the Democrats in 2022. While they may be trying to do everything they can to ensure that their losses aren't insurmountable or just monumental as they were in 2010 and 2014, they are just lagging behind in terms of fundraising. But Democrats still have good numbers. It's not as if they're $10, $20 million behind. They are probably just a few million behind in some cases, and in certain races, they are out fundraising Republicans, and when you apply it to certain quarters of the year. But in the first 6 months, this is just simply a lot of money. You know, to put it into perspective, an individual state such as Florida might cost a politician in a Senate election $20-30 million to run. You know, when you're looking at North Carolina, maybe $10-20 million. When you're looking at Pennsylvania, $20-25 million. It's a lot of money, I'm sure, but for there to be a $100 million from Donald Trump for these Republicans, this is good because it allows them to focus their funds that may not necessarily have been utilized in other parts of the country, that they can now utilize in those other parts of the country because they have a buffer, because they have this amount of money. And it also does sort of tell you that there is still energy for President Trump, that his name certainly is going to be usable for the Democratic Party in 2022. When you take a look at just how many contributors that he got and how many people were heavily focused on this re-election campaign for Trump in 2024, or just whatever he wants to do with the money for 2022 and beyond, you know, you just start to see just simply how many Americans are still worked up and still convinced that Joe Biden lost the 2020 election, convinced that Donald Trump had the election stolen from him, that Donald Trump is the true president of the United States. You know, you have many of Americans believing this to this day and are willing to throw money, hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars in some cases, towards Donald Trump, and some pretty notable names such as Kelly Loeffler or Mike Liddell, other people that are popular figures within the GOP that are raising money for Donald Trump and sending a lot to him, contributing to this $100 million. And it is quite fascinating to see. I mean, you are looking at the former president of the United States, who many of us expected to vacate his office and then leave, and then not really be super politically active. I mean, while he may be, of course, campaigning in deep red states, trying to win primaries for certain candidates that he viewed as the best for his personal interests, we never really imagined that he'd be actively fundraising hundreds or $100 million, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars by 2022. Because understand where we are in terms of this year. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't have any major elections to tap into at the end of this year. Other than the Virginia gubernatorial election, there simply isn't many competitive races that he needs to be heavily focused on. And the one that he did focus on, Texas's 6th district, just held their general election and his candidate lost. But a Republican did end up taking the place. It was a runoff between two Republicans. So, while Donald Trump's candidate did lose, another Republican still took the place. It really didn't matter in terms of overall party composition. But point being that Donald Trump doesn't have much to tap into. And if he is fundraising this much money already, it tells Democrats a lot. It tells Democrats that despite this not being a wave year, a midterm year, a presidential election general year, that he just still seems to be a fundraising juggernaut that Democrats need to fight. When the Democratic Party looks at Donald Trump, many of them probably view him as a candidate who can't come back to haunt the Democrats, can't really be that pressing political figure like he once was. And in a regard, they are correct. Donald Trump will never be president of the United States, at least for the foreseeable future. He certainly won't be through 2025. But that doesn't necessarily mean he can't impact individual races. You see, if you remember back in 2016, right after Barack Obama, or 2017, 2018, right after Barack Obama had left office, he was campaigning for Democrats in the midterms. In 2020, he campaigned for Joe Biden in certain states. He went down to Florida. He went up to Georgia. He was around the nation helping Joe Biden and trying to get him elected as the next president of the United States. And while Donald Trump may not necessarily take as a direct approach right now, he seems to be focused on raising the money and sending out individual ads. So it isn't necessarily unheard of for former presidents to be politically active, but Donald Trump, I will say, is certainly going to be very politically active. And if he already gets this fundraising ego boost, he's certainly going to be sending out more emails, more texts, reaching out to donors and asking for more money, because this will help him and his political power. I think that there is just so much to unpack with the simple sheer amount of money that was fundraised, so many political implications. It's well beyond the United States Senate. It's well beyond the House or governor elections. This means that Donald Trump is here to stay. This amount of money doesn't just go towards one person for no reason. It's not as if he's going to sit on this money or try to utilize it for something else. This is going back into back into Republicans and their pockets to elect them in 2022, to land Democrats a devastating blow that they otherwise might not have had in individual races. I mean, I kid you not, this $100 million that was raised in the first 6 months might make or break certain races in about a year and a half. Certain races that otherwise might not have been super competitive or might have been leaning towards the Democrats, this $10 million to Georgia, $20 million to North Carolina, $30 million to Pennsylvania, with $40 million left over for the House and governor elections, well, that might make a very tremendous difference in individual races. Every single dollar counts. A lot of the money counts. And Democrats also, historically speaking, need to out-fundraise Republicans in order to win elections, especially when the incumbents are Republicans. And while that doesn't seem to be the case now, Democrats might get more energy as the midterms start to ramp up, but there's no telling as to whether or not that's actually going to happen. But all in all, when I look at these midterms, when I look at the Senate elections, when I look at the House elections, and I see that Donald Trump is raising this amount of money, that seems to be scaring a lot of Democrats, because it really should. They need to understand that they need to do better in terms of raising more money. They need to realize that Donald Trump is going nowhere, that he's going to be politically active for the next year, foreseeable future, to be completely honest with you, and that his name, while surely will help them in some races in which Democrats start to have an advantage, or they voted against Donald Trump in 2020 for the case of Pennsylvania and the case of Georgia, it may also prove to be detrimental in other states. And in terms of overall fundraising numbers, well, then I I would also say it does also prove to be detrimental in its entirety because it doesn't help the Democrats if they are in a very unfortunate position with fundraising when they already need to be ahead of the GOP in terms of overall numbers. These generic ballot numbers are not looking too good for Democrats while they may be taking the lead in some of them, and while they're only behind in a few or tied in one. But point being, they should be further ahead in terms of fundraising, in terms of generic ballot numbers, if they want to win in 2022 and have good results, but there is no guarantee that will actually happen. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.